So we're just preparing to go live on Facebook. Well, welcome to the Co-Creative Sex Dialogues. We have a special guest today, Ron. It was sort of a funny way that we kind of started talking about this whole theme of body shame, because I was just mentioning to him that I was doing this podcast and just giving some examples of what kind of issues people deal with around body shame. And then Ron kind of rolled his eyes. He's like, in recognition that, yeah, he knows exactly what I was talking about. So I was like, hey, why don't I interview you? Like, you'd be a great person to talk about. And as I kept on digging into Ron's story, there was all kinds of very interesting, experiences and sort of historical context for everything. And I thought it could be really interesting for other people to discover this. So, Ron, you said something really interesting to me the other day that I didn't actually have a chance to deepen with you, but you told me that coming from a Mennonite background, that you spent your childhood in Canada, around Winnipeg, but speaking German. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's the case.
Yeah.
Actually, to make that more accurate, it's called Plautdeutsch. It's Low German. It's more of a dialect than an actual language. It's not really written.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just give us a little bit of the context of your childhood, and then eventually we'll go into a little bit like what were the different things you dealt with in your lifetime, because they were very colorful experiences and really powerful things you had to overcome. So I thought I think it's interesting for everyone to discover this, but like let's really paint the context in which you grew up in. So like, what was it like if you're speaking German? You said you lived in you grew up in a sort of a small, like a one-room schoolhouse. Just give us a little bit of the context here.
Sure. Well, I'm the oldest of 4 children. My dad was a teacher, and he taught in one-room schools out in the country. And once I was old enough to go to school, which was grade 1, we didn't have kindergarten there. He was my teacher in grade 1 and grade 2, which yeah, it has its own little twists and turns. So,
were you supposed to be the perfect child, or you're supposed to be the one that shows the example, or?
well, yeah, to a certain extent. So my dad felt that because he was teaching me, he had to, show that he wasn't giving me any kind of favoritism or anything. And once I was in school, a lot of the kids figured that he was giving me favoritism because I was his son. So I had these dynamics coming from both sides, caught in the middle, catch-22. I just, yeah. So I'd come in from both sides.
Yeah. And just knowing a little bit about you, like I get the sense that you're a really like perceptive person, very sensitive to dynamics. Like they're not, some people can just like brush them off, but I could see you being more that timid person that takes everything on. Would you say that that's accurate, or is there something you'd rather kind of like describe it differently?
I wouldn't say I was timid. No, I tended to get into trouble quite frequently.
Okay.
It's just kind of, I don't know if it was my curiosity or my rebellion against authority or what it was, but yeah, I seemed to get into trouble fairly frequently.
Mm-hmm. So you grew up in that kind of dynamic. You're at school. There's like, kids think that you're being favored. Your dad wants to show that you're not being favored. Mm-hmm. Do you want to give us like one little example of that?
Well, I have always been an entrepreneur, even at that age. And so I started drawing comics, and I made this little comic book. And one of the classmates, he was in the same grade as I was, Bernie, liked my comic book. So I said, okay, I'll sell it to you for $0.10. He said, okay, sure. So he comes to school the next day. He's got his bright, shiny dime, and he gives it to me, and I give him the comic book, and he takes off. And probably about 15 minutes later, him and a whole crowd of other kids come along, and they're saying, well, what did you sell him that shit for 10 cents? It's not worth anything, and that kind of stuff. So they got my dad involved, and my dad basically said, give him his money back. I didn't want to. I worked hard. yeah, so I ended up having to give my dime back, and I was out a comic book that I had worked for a couple of days on. Yeah.
Right. So just give us the picture of, like, sometimes we have different images of Mennonite communities. Like some can be like really sort of back to the earth kind of things. Was it like, what was it like exactly? Was it more like, small town and just like the values of Mennonite? Or was it like,
Yeah,
pretty
it was a
strict?
very small town. So my dad had come from a town that was maybe about 15, 20 miles away, and we went there quite frequently for shopping and visiting family and so on. So we'd go into the co-op store or wherever, and my dad knew almost everybody. So we'd be talking to everybody in Low German. It was just, they're very social people. And um, uh, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. My grandfather was a reeve in the municipality, so he was kind of highly regarded, and everybody basically knew who we were. My uncle was the mayor of the town, and
Mhm. So it wasn't necessarily an agricultural kind of setup.
yeah, agricultural, mixed farming, that
Right.
type of thing, cattle, pigs, wheat, so on.
Okay.
And
So you also told me that your mom had you at a very young age.
yeah, they got married. I don't know. I, she might have been 17 or 18 or something, but they got married and had me very shortly after. She was 18 still. Um, so yeah, they were a young family. My dad worked on construction for his brother, building roads, and we lived in a house trailer.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now you told me that one of these really like impressed, sort of like one of these moments that was very left a strong impression on you, was when you were 8 and your mother had your brother. Can
Hmm.
you describe that scenario to us a little bit?
Um, well, my mom developed postpartum depression in the winter, I guess right after Christmas. And my brother was born on Boxing Day. And I didn't notice it, but other people did. And she was starting to withdraw into herself and acting out in ways that, not good. And yeah, so it was shortly after school was dismissed. One day, my mom comes out of the bedroom all dressed up, and she says, "Get in the car." And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. My mom doesn't drive, so, but okay. So we piled all the kids into the car, and she's trying to start the car. My dad comes running out and pulls the keys away from her. And her intent was to go drive off a bridge or something. She
Wow.
was really in the throes of, the postpartum depression. And at that point, she was admitted to hospital, and she was institutionalized for, well, probably at least a couple of years before. It was a year before I saw her again, before any of us saw her again.
Hmm.
And, back in that day when they treated, mental health issues and stuff, they were a little bit more, maybe not as enlightened as we are now. So she was under electric shock therapy and some very strong pharmaceuticals, and she was a very different person.
When she came back, or just during this time?
Well, even during this time, I remember one time they went to visit her. We hadn't seen her, like I said, for about a year, and she was a space cadet. And
Hmm.
my one little sister started to cry, and then of course my mom started to cry, and then the visit was over. So
Wow. Wow, like I can just imagine the different messages you can get in that moment. Like if someone cries, it's a really dangerous thing. You
yeah,
might lose your mom.
yeah. My dad told me, "Don't let your sister cry." I'm thinking, well, how am I supposed to do that?
Right.
Yeah,
You're like 8, 9 years old.
yeah. And put my
So,
neck around her, pull her down. Anyway,
so, so yeah. So at 8 years old, your mom is admitted, and she almost like got everyone in the car and drove off maybe a bridge, and your dad comes out. There's a lot of like traumatic things happening right there. And on top of it, you told me that you were not necessarily at home during this time, that you were sort of dispatched, you and your brothers and sisters, into different homes.
Yeah, I was sent, I don't even remember where I was sent at first. I think it was over to one of my aunties. My sisters ended up to going to a couple from church that had a daughter their age. And my little brother was put into foster care in a family that lived in the same town. So we were all located geographically kind of in the same general vicinity, but we
Mhm.
weren't in the same homes. And my
So
little
how
brother, I
was
couldn't see
that
for
for
a couple
you,
of years.
not being in your own home? Like, what kind of impressions left those experiences?
Initially, it was very scary. I didn't really know what was happening. Um, I wasn't really told an awful lot other than by my father saying that, your mom's in the hospital, we don't know how long for. And
Right.
so I got shipped to my other grandparents and then
Kind of
to
distressing
other
not
aunts
knowing,
and
the
uncles.
end too, right?
Yeah, you're really up in the air.
Yeah. Right. So then, okay, so what we were about to say, sorry, I interrupted you. You're shipped
Yeah,
off.
yeah, moving around a lot. I can really feel a great deal of empathy for any kids that have gone through the foster care system or have been adopted, that kind of thing. There's a lot of uncertainty, and you don't always know what's going to happen next because other people are in control of your future.
Mm,
So,
right. So how did that impact your feeling of self-worth and your feeling of, yeah, just that whole sense of self in that moment?
well, thing is that being shipped off to other homes, etc., they maybe didn't watch out for me as much as my parents would have. So I kind of had a bit of free reign, and I took it and ran. I probably had much more freedom than I should have, and I'd go gallivanting all over town and getting myself into trouble and so on.
So can you give us an example of you getting into trouble?
Oh yeah, I remember I was talking to one of the neighbor kids. He was asking me, "Well, where are you living? What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I just live over there. That's my house." And they said, "Well, what do you eat and who cooks for you?" And I said, "Well, I just make some toast and I'm good." So he went home and he told his mother this, and then his mother called my auntie, and then my auntie sent my cousins out looking for me, and they dragged me back to my auntie's house. I got reprimanded quite strongly. Yeah.
Mm, right. So, so eventually your mom came back, and what was the experience when you all went back home?
Well, it felt great. It was good to have us all together. She was not. She wasn't healed. Let's just say that. They still had her on some very strong drugs, and there's several times she would have relapses. We would have to get parceled out again to family, usually. For at least for myself, I would get parceled out to my other aunt and uncles, and
Go back and forth.
back and forth, lots of back and forth. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, as an adult, when you look back at that period, like what did you learn about the impact on you of all that kind of moving around and feeling like if your mom's unstable, you might lose your home?
Yeah. Um, Ultimately, it left me in a position of having a great deal of difficulty trusting people,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
trusting women to a certain extent, um,
Hmm.
and not really liking that I had to live my life that it was always based on somebody else's decision.
Mm.
And I became very self-actualized at a quite a young age, and I began to make a lot of my own decisions and start to, I guess, push the boundaries quite a bit.
Yeah. So So let's say you grew up, and I know that one of the moments that felt like like that really impacted your sense of self in terms of body shame was, when you were a young man. Can you
Yeah.
share a little bit about how that sort of came about?
Well, remember we went to church one Sunday. I think I was probably about 5, 6, something like that, and I was pretty thin. And this one boy came up to me and said, "You're skinny. How come you're so skinny? Something wrong with you, or why are you skinny?" And I thought, "Skinny? Me?" And it was just not part of my, thought process. I didn't think about people that way. I didn't think about them fat, skinny, regular, or anything like that. It was just like everybody's everybody. And it kind of left this question in my mind. And I began to have other people ask me that question. I start to feel a little bit inferior. I'd go into sports at school, and I'd be the last kid picked because I was so skinny. Um, and yeah, so there wasn't an awful lot I could do about that. I just, it was just weird. I don't know
Yeah,
what to say about it.
yeah. You mentioned that you had a situation with a girlfriend that left a strong impression on you. Do you want to share that story?
Yeah. Okay. So I was about 16 or so. My girlfriend's parents were away for a week or something. So I was at her place. We were laying in bed, and I had to go use the washroom. So I got up and go to the washroom, and she starts laughing at me and saying, "Well, what's so funny? You're so skinny. You look like a girl." What? What? And she keeps laughing. "You're just so skinny," and just kind of going on in that vein, and it was awkward.
Hmm. Now, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but at that time, like, were you already sexually active? Or was it sort of later on in the game?
No, I was actually active then. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did this kind of play out, this feeling of skinny and that kind of more intimate scenario?
Yeah, it kind of left me feeling like I wasn't enough. And after her and I broke up, I didn't have any girlfriends probably for at least, a couple of years at least. And I felt that maybe because I didn't look as buff as maybe some of the other guys or all that, I was lacking. I was just not
Hmm.
stocky enough, bulky
Yeah.
enough, whatever.
Well, it's kind of interesting what you said about, growing up with your mom, and she's like not always someone you can depend on, and it's hard for you to trust. And then you have this girlfriend that laughs at you, you know, kind of like, as confirms the theory in ways, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so as you kind of start constructing your sense of self, what were the other elements that started coming in around shame? Like maybe it's not just body shame, but it's, you talked about things going on at your church, different ideas and different ways of, making you feel like, you're judged or whatever. So can you construct different areas in your life where you start feeling that element of like, wow, there's like, I'm feeling ashamed or being shamed for something?
Yeah, well, Mennonites have a well-deserved reputation for being very judgy, and you're always watched, especially in a small town. Everybody knows everybody, and they all know your business, and they form opinions on that, whether it's right or wrong. And it was like that at church for our family. Um, we'd say
So
hello to somebody, and they would turn away. Hmm?
what kind of judgments do
Sorry.
they have on you guys?
Well, your family's broken up. Your mother and father are separated, so you must have sinned somehow. That's the only reason why that would have happened to you.
Mhm.
Um, you know, that
So it could have
connects.
been in the 60s and 70s, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't really feel welcome or at home there.
Hmm.
It was just the general mood of the whole place. So,
Right. And was it mostly from the kids? Was it from the people coming to church, or was it also the leadership?
there was one person in leadership that I felt that from, but overall it was the parents and by extension their children. If they had talked about it at home, their kids were privy, of course, because they overheard. And then you'd receive the Coles notes from the kids, if you will. Yeah.
Hmm. You wrote me a few little stories that you just gave titles for, and I'll just name them because you haven't told me them yet. But they had to do with that illustrated some form of issue around shame. So you had the chocolate cake.
Right. So I don't remember what grade it was. I think it was grade 7. We were doing a health class thing and nutrition, etc. And it was the time that my parents were split up. My mom wasn't getting any kind of support from my dad, and what money we did have come in went for food, and it was the real basics like potatoes and flour and things like that. So I'd go home for lunch and I'd have some bread or maybe some chocolate cake or something like that. It wasn't really what you would call a balanced diet. And then it was kind of when I was starting my growth spurt, and I was hungry constantly, and so I was at school filling out my chart for my health class, what we were eating and stuff like that, and we passed around the papers in the class, and somebody that got mine said, "This can't be right," and they went to the teacher, and right out in class they started talking about it all, and it felt it was humiliating,
Like
actually,
talking about your
because
chocolate cake eating?
yeah, because this is your diet. And I said,
Oh,
yeah,
right.
it's right. They asked me, this can't be right. And I said, yeah, it's right. This is what
Right.
this is your diet. And
So like kind of like a sense that like, at home you're not really getting the support and you're kind of in survival mode a little bit. And then in the class setting, you sort of just being authentic about what you're eating. And then it's kind of like everyone's like, ooh, like that guy kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, there's that shame that comes with the story of your family and being made, well, that you're not like this family that's all together and kind of thing.
yeah. In fact, I think we were the only. There was one other family. I'm sorry. There's us and another family where there had been a marriage breakup um, in a town of about 2,500 people. So I mean, it's a very small percentage across there, and yeah, a lot of people judge that.
Hmm. So it
Yeah,
sounds
it
like,
was.
there's all these struggles your family's experiencing, and there's a breakdown happening between your mom, your dad. Your mom's having mental health issues. There's a sense of like a lack of support for you and your brothers and sisters. And it's interesting how in a small town you would have thought, oh, like people would have been aware of this and be more supportive, but it sounds as though it was the opposite. It was like more like stay away, or like that's not good, or kind of instead of being a support system, it sounds as though they were just wanting to stay at bay because of your problems.
Yeah. Yeah, we might catch it. It might happen to well, if they judged us, they never thought that it could happen to them. And interestingly enough, some of the people that had judged us to that extent went through the same things themselves later on. So
Right.
karma is coming back to bite them.
So yeah, I'm just curious, like when have all these people judging you for something you don't really have control over, that is basically your eating and how you're showing up for school, and just like it sounds like there's a lot of things around eating and just your body and things like that. So I'm just curious, like, um, what do you feel this? What's this with all that judgment about your family breaking up? Like, what's the actual shame that you got from that? Like that your family, like what did you keep with you after that in terms of, well, you probably, it sounds as though you're taking care of a lot of stuff now, so you're not stuck in it anymore. But like,
Mm.
when you've been sort of ostracized in a way and made wrong, there's a kind of judgment that comes with it. So I'm just curious, what's the shame that you took from that situation?
Yeah, well, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy to be part of this community. If there's anything that I really want to do, like play hockey or anything like that, I'm just not enough.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting. Like that whole feeling being excluded and ostracized in a way. And how do you feel like that played out in your life after that?
Well, I had something to prove.
Hmm.
And when we left that town, my parents reconciled when I was 16. And, it was a happy time for us that things started to come together again. We were a family again, but we had to move. Um, the school board wouldn't hire my father back. So um, we moved up to northern Manitoba. It was a mining town. And it was a new clean slate for me. I could start over and, nobody would judge me. And I thought that was awesome. It was great. And this is kind of where I started into the drug culture. You know, they, people accepted me for what I was. It wasn't, oh, you're skinny, so I don't want you to be my friend or anything like that. I had some friends that were overweight, and we never made an issue about that, but they seemed to make one about me being skinny. So,
Hmm.
but I fell in with these friends, and I'm actually still friends with some of them to this day. But um, I was always trying to prove myself, whether I drank more or used more drugs than anybody else, or I could fight, or anything like that.
So what kind of drugs were the drugs of the day?
Well, it was pretty soft stuff. I mean, we smoked a lot of hash and weed and uh, acid and speed and things like that.
Hmm. Right. So in that moment, there was moments of like feeling of connection and like being in this gang of people and consuming and maybe proving yourself, but at the same time, there's some joy in that after feeling so disconnected and judged. But there's probably also like a shadow side to that. So do you want to name that a little bit?
Um, yeah, ultimately, my use became problematic. Um, I was working as a dime driller. We were out working out in the bush quite a bit, and that winter I was working outside every day. It was quite cold. We would work as long as there was sunshine, and then we'd come home and we'd party our faces off and go back out and repeat. And I don't know how much I drank that one night, but it was quite a bit. And I came in and I could hardly pour myself a cup of coffee in the lunchroom. And some of the older drillers started to give me what for, uh, why are you coming in drunk, and so on.
Hmm.
So I got laid off, and I realized that at that point that I needed to make some changes in my life.
Hmm. So when you were up in that northern community, was there any relationships that you had with women, or was it mostly work and the party style?
Mostly work and the party style, and I mean we were, how would I put it? there'd be a group of friends together, both male and female, and we would hang out together. So, some of them were couples, some weren't. We just went out and did everything kind of as a group.
Mm-hmm.
There was one girl I was a bit friendly with, but that didn't last very long, and probably due to my drinking.
Mm-hmm. So you went back down, and you went through a process of, getting clean. So what did that look like?
I was staying with my stepsister and her husband for a little while. So they lived a very clean church-going lifestyle, which I wasn't entirely enthusiastic about. I'd kind of had my fill of religion at that point. But I stayed there, and it was a different city where I didn't really know that many people. And for a period of time, I dropped all those habits.
You could just stop on your own. You didn't get any like sort of support or counseling.
No, I stopped on my own. And it's important to have a lot of self-discipline.
Wow, that is pretty powerful because, yeah, especially when you're using it as a way to feel better for yourself, I think it's pretty difficult to stop. So
Yeah,
that's pretty powerful.
I think alcohol was probably harder to stop than the drugs were.
Right. You mentioned when you sort of initially were talking that these Jesus people came up from Woodstock, and I was like, I don't even know what that is exactly. So, but it seemed important to you, so I would love to hear a little bit more what that is.
Yeah, it was kind of like a bright respite in the midst of where I was growing up. This is actually going back to my hometown, and this group of people came up to go to this little Bible school or whatever it was inside our hometown, and they would go to our church. And they weren't accepted by the people in the church either because they were different. They had long hair, beads, they dressed differently, different way of talking.
What were their value system? What was their value system? Like what was their
Well,
philosophy?
yeah, it was kind of like very basic first century Christianity. And so they had a little coffee house. And one of my friends invited me to go with them one time. So I went, and it was very peaceful, calm. People were friendly. You just kind of felt at home. It wasn't a negative experience by any chance. So it maybe seen religion from a different point of view than maybe what I had experienced at that so far to that point was the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And so.
So it's interesting. Like there's this whole theme that you go through between being accepted and not accepted, judged and not judged, and like these themes come back as important threads in your life, right?
Yeah.
Have some other little things that you mentioned here, so we'll see where they land in your biography. But it says auntie means well. Do you remember that?
Sorry. Maybe come back to me later. I don't.
Okay, and then you wrote your mama.
Yeah.
Things around body shame or shame.
Yeah. I was hanging around one summer, the other side of town with some friends and stuff, and there's a group of us. And I don't know how it happened, but me and this guy started scuffling with me, so we scuffled back and forth for a while. And then somebody tripped me, and then like 5 guys piled on top of me, and I was getting the boots laid to me and punches and stuff. And I thought these guys were my friends. Yeah.
Sort of a sense of betrayal from your friends.
Yeah, that became kind of a theme there. So, at that point, I started to see that maybe I couldn't really wholeheartedly trust or believe anyone to, even if
Mm,
they said they were my friend, but
yeah.
that was something other.
Yeah. Well, it just goes to show like how deep these feelings of, when we're children, we have these experiences, or later on, like teenage, whatever, and being betrayed, how deep and impacting it is in our life, and how we then go about in the world after, right? That whole element of trust.
Yeah.
And when there's no trust, I mean, the world we create is usually very isolated, right? Very isolating.
Mm.
So how do you feel like these things impacted your life after, like that feeling it's very difficult to trust people?
Um, it wasn't the way I wanted it to be, but it seemed to be that that was what I needed to do in order to protect myself.
Yeah. It was like
But
your
that maybe,
mechanism of survival, right?
yeah, and the way I looked at it, it could happen anytime. So just be on your guard. So
Yeah.
I was guarded most of the time.
Hmm. Right. Here you have after gym showers.
Yeah. So I was really shy after gym. This was after elementary school. We were just moving into junior high. We had to have showers after gym, and I thought, oh God, I can't do that. But so the gym showers are not really the great equalizer at all. We see everybody from a micro penis to the guy that's maybe more mature than he should be, and so here I am, kind of a skinny kid. I jumped in the shower quickly and toweled myself off and just got dressed as fast as I could, hoping nobody would ever see me, and back to class. But yeah, it was a difficult thing, especially since I was so thin at that point, thinking I'd get teased for it. And I did a little bit, but it wasn't as much as some of the other guys got. So
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah,
So there's a real big sense of vulnerability in these showers.
yeah, yeah.
Right. So yeah, so the world is a place where you can always be teased and made fun of and judged, and it's a pretty hostile place. You have to be on
Mhm.
your guard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here you have the word the dry.
Okay, so this is like a junior high shower, except it's work. And when I was in Thompson, that mining town, I got a job underground in the mine. And so the change room was basically this big empty room with these baskets that hung down where you put your clothes in, and you dressed in your work clothes, which were in the basket, and go do your work, and you'd come after shift, and everybody'd strip down and run into this huge communal shower and shower off and go on to work, go on home. And I remember the first couple of times I was really like quite I don't know, embarrassed. I don't think it was quite word. Anyway, I felt quite shy about jumping in the shower with people coming and going all the time, and till one of my coworkers said to me, "You know what? Everybody looks the same. Nobody cares. Just go wash off. Don't do it at home because you're going to plug the drain." So I did, and after a while, it just was second nature. It didn't matter anymore.
Right. But it took a time to like sort of overcome that feeling of like not being safe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, here's the last one. Hafusta. Yafusta.
Okay, that's a Ukrainian word for strength or heft or muscle or something like that. And I was working with this guy. He was Ukrainian, and we had to move something. And I'd worked in the mines as a driller and stuff, and I was pretty strong. I didn't have any fat on me, and I could easily lift almost double my weight.
Hmm.
But he's giving me a hard time. Like, you got to move this over. Like, I better do it because you're too skinny. You can't do this. And I just figured, you jerk. Yeah, I can. And I did it right in front of him, and he couldn't believe me. Like, where did you get that from?
So you proved him wrong.
I proved him wrong. Yeah.
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 So eventually you got married and
Yeah.
you had 3 children. So what would you like to say about your marriage, like being with a woman finally, eventually? What was that experience like?
Well, initially it was great. Somebody's home to cook for you, and you have sex almost whenever you want it, and you got somebody to do stuff with. And for the first few years, it was pretty good.
Hmm. And then it kind of went down the drain after?
Yeah, we had all kinds of things happen that
Mm-hmm.
were difficult. I didn't always handle all of them in the right way,
Right.
and at a certain point, both of you look at each other and say, "What the hell was I thinking?" Um,
Right. So eventually you left the relationship. Now you mentioned to me that you, at one point, really yourself went through depression and really considered suicide. At what point was this in your biography?
well, that's quite a bit later in life.
Okay. Like when did you do, how old were your kids when you divorced?
My youngest was 19 or 20.
Okay.
So they were all grown
Adults.
up out of the hood. Yeah, they were young adults.
Okay.
So, um, sorry, what was the question again?
So the question is about the suicide, the idea of grappling with suicide. What period was that at, and what was triggering that, and why was that something that you were considering?
Yeah, well, I'd gone through bouts of depression before, but I always recovered. And then in the last job that I had in Winnipeg, it was, lack of a better word, it was a shit show. I was working for somebody that, short story is, we didn't get along that well anymore. Towards the end, he had a different way of seeing things than I did, and so he fired me. And that really hit me personally, because I put a lot of effort into trying to help him get off the ground, and I felt I was being, misused. But I moved to Alberta, and I went to live with my brother and his family, and I was there for 3 years. But the depression started to really intensify, and I really didn't have anybody I could talk to about it. And I saw my doctor. He prescribed some medication for me, and it didn't really help at all. So after that job got closed down because of the crash in oil, I came here to Vancouver and was working, but I was still feeling the depression, and it was increasing. It was affecting my ability to work, think. And the overriding thought often was that I just like to end it all because it's just too painful for me to bear anymore. And I just, I'm so tired of this.
Like, what was the actual thing that you found unbearable? Like, what was the feeling?
It was like crushing inside. It was like there was a hand inside my head crushing my brain, and inside my heart crushing my heart. Just it's a little hard to describe unless you've actually had it, but it's it's a variety of different things.
Like, is it a feeling that your life isn't worth anything, or there's no hope, or what's that?
Yeah, it's a mixture of all those things. I would try to work and I couldn't focus or concentrate for anything. Like I would take like a whole day to do one simple task that would have taken me maybe an hour before, that kind of thing, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And
Like almost a lack of meaning and meaningfulness.
yeah,
Yeah. You
there
also
was
shared
no
with me,
satisfaction.
yeah.
Pardon me?
You also shared with me that there was, so maybe just before this question, how close did you get to actually committing suicide?
I was thinking of ways that I could do it, what I needed to do beforehand, like taking care of my affairs, my will, what I was going to do, where the money was going to go for my kids and stuff like that, and letters I would write to each of them.
Had you written those letters?
I started once, and I think this is really the point that made me think that I had to get help somewhere. I
Mm.
started writing the letter, and I couldn't bear the thought of my son reading this and me being gone,
Hmm.
him being angry at me and hurt.
Right.
It was crushing.
Right. So what was that turning point for you?
Well, I knew I needed to do something. It was the weight I felt inside me was just bringing me down. So I talked to my doctor and I said, I'm really having a problem with this, and I need some help. And so she recommended me to a program at Burnaby Hospital. And I went through this program that they had. Every week we would go there in the morning for an hour or so, and we had either a psychologist or a doctor or a counselor or something lead the session, talk about different ways of managing depression and so on, the triggers that come with that. And I'd done the last session and I was getting ready to go, and the counselor said to me, "Ron, I'd like to talk to you for a minute." So Carrie took me into her office and she started asking me all kinds of questions. And she says, "I don't even know why you're working. You shouldn't even be working." So she arranged a meeting with the psychologist there, or the psychiatrist. And I told him the other times I'd gone through similar circumstances, not to the great as intense as that, but he said, "You've got chronic depression, and if you keep pushing this, you're probably not going to live." So I saw Carrie for, I don't know how long. I think it was about 3 months, once a week. And she was really helpful, um, talking through different issues and that. And they put me on some medication, which helped to a certain degree. But my circumstances really hadn't changed a whole lot. I was still alone, feeling lonely most of the time. And
Hmm. So you told me that there was like something though that really changed things for you, and it was in this meeting with another person. Do you want to share a little bit about that? What like how that started open up a new possibility for you?
yeah, I was working, and they hired a new person, and I was assigned to take her out to teach her the ropes and how to do sales and different things about the business. And man, there was something really different about her that most of the people I was contacting or being in touch with were not like that at all. And so I started asking her, like, what are you doing? Why are you here? All those kind of questions. And she started talking about a program that she'd been through. It was through Clear Mind International. It was a counseling program, self-help kind of thing. So that got my curiosity up a little bit, and she kept talking to me about this, and she told me about her struggles and about some of her journey, and I thought, well, this is maybe there's a little bit of hope down this way. I need to find out more about this. So she invited me to a meeting that they had the one night. It was an outreach thing, and I was quite taken by it. It really struck a chord with me, and so I went to a weekend workshop that they had, and it really impacted me. So I felt like there was hope, and that was something I'd really been lacking.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel I had a source of hope around me at all.
So what was it about that program that made a difference? Because you'd been seeing a therapist, you'd been doing all kinds of things, getting medication, but what was it about this weekend that really reached, like sort of rejigged something?
It's called transpersonal therapy, and I would say there's, as great as the counselor was that I'd been seeing, I didn't always feel that some of the deeper things inside me were touched on, but this really did. It really dug down deep, and I felt that I was heard, and I felt that I was there's an opportunity for healing that came through that.
Like what parts of yourself do you feel like were heard that weren't heard before? You have an example of that?
Emotionally, I really shut down, and I had put myself, I'd worked on making myself not feel anything, because as long as I felt something, it hurt. So I didn't want to hurt. And so I worked at ways of shutting that down. I didn't feel anything at all. But the problem was that I didn't feel anything at all. And I was numb all the time. And I didn't feel life. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel a lot of things. And honestly, I missed that. And that's what was addressed.
Hmm. Like they just really heard that call for like wanting something better and
Yeah,
also the deep numbness that was there.
yeah. It was a journey. It didn't happen overnight. It took almost a year, and input from a lot of good people.
Do you feel like there was something spiritual that happened?
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't call it religious spirituality. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's more of a, well, I'm not going to talk about my views on religion and all that, but yeah, there was something spiritual. It was something bigger than myself.
Right. That
Yeah,
sort of opened up something,
that's right. Yeah,
which was maybe not there in the counseling from other
yeah,
situations. Like it's just opened up to some form of connection, feeling of
yeah.
connectiveness.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I'm just trying to think if we covered everything. Um, if you were to, give a message to someone that's suffering either body shame or any kind of shame or heaviness, the lack of hope, or, like what would be your message to these people that are really in a difficult situation?
Yeah, don't give up. maybe you don't feel a lot of hope right now, but take the step of reaching out to someone, someone you trust, and just share a little bit about where you're at. And that's a good starting point.
And what would you give advice to someone that wants to support someone in that situation? What piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah. Um, Listen, don't judge. Give them space, give them room. Hold that space for them. Let them. Don't try to put words in their mouth. Let them say it in their own words, and be compassionate.
Mm. Hmm. Okay. Well, do you want to make any final words about your journey or anything else? Or do you feel complete?
You know what? I'm happy to be alive. I'm happy where I'm at, even though my circumstances may be kind of shitty sometimes. I'm happy, and I think for I can really say that for the first time in my life, I'm contented and I'm grateful for what I have.
Hmm. That's a powerful place to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that you're also in a place where you're yourself becoming a counselor and doing all the work, maybe not to necessarily become one, but because you want to keep on developing these skills, right? And
Yeah.
that people have mentioned that you're a really good listener.
Always be available because you never know who you meet on the street. And sometimes they just need a kind word from you or a listening ear.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you for showing up and being so authentic and open on a Facebook live stream, and taking that opportunity. Like, I actually gave Ron a few opportunities. If he didn't want to do it, it was all right. But he was like, no, no, no. It was really like, I feel he really wanted to overcome something and go into this. So I just
Yeah.
want to say that I'm really like proud of you, and it's really awesome that you're willing to be true and open and transparent for the people to just hear your story. And there's been a lot of ups and downs and crazy things that you went through, so it takes something to be so genuine and transparent. So thank you.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Julie.
Cool. Well, thank you for showing up.
Okay.
I just before we finish, I just wanted to announce for next week. It's a completely shifting of gears of what we're going to be talking about. We have a nice array on the Co-Creative Sex Dialogues. We have Chenille that is coming to talk, and she's actually all the way in Sicily, Italy. And she's the creator of this company called Seduction and Success.
Oh,
And she's going to represent all the things of soul, sensuality, and success. And she sort of teaches people how to tap into their inner seductress to attract success. So we'll learn a few tips from her next week. And I think she's a real jazzy, fun woman. So stay tuned for next Tuesday for the Co-Creative Sex Dialogues.
I can't miss that.
Yeah, and it's always in this theme. We're sort of like on this thread of just deepening this question of shame and body shame, because it seems to be a blocker and a weight on a lot of people. And I love just hearing from so many different angles and different types of people and different walks of life, because everyone has their stories. So it's this really universal human experience. So thanks for everyone, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.